Today we're getting an inside look at the Battle of Pokrovsk. This is the southern Ukrainian city facing the brunt of the ongoing Russian offensive. It's here that Ukrainian soldiers are under near constant bombardment from Russian artillery, glide bombs, and drones while doing all they can to fend off infantry attacks. Nick Laidlaw is recently back from a trip to Ukraine where he embedded with artillery crews, drone units, and medical teams to document first-hand accounts of the war. Now, we're actually working on a fundraiser right now to get vehicles and night vision devices to the 25th Brigade teams that hosted Nick and, quite frankly, kept him alive while he was there. Now, the link to that campaign is in the description below, alongside everywhere that you can find and follow Nick. Now, what we're getting into here is just a small glimpse into the incredibly powerful stories I'm certain Nick will soon be telling. And with that, let's get to the conversation. All right, Nick, thanks so much for taking the time, man. I know we've chatted a little bit about this trip, but as you were getting into some of the details here, I thought, man, there's a lot of people that would really be interested in hearing what you just experienced in Ukraine. So appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, of course. It's a pleasure coming on, chatting with you, as always, man.
Was this how many times you've been over now?
So I've done 4 journalism trips, 1 to Israel, as you know, and now 3 to Ukraine.
Okay, rough dates on the trips to Ukraine before this, just to kind of set the stage?
First trip was November of 2022. Second trip was like October, early November of last year, 24. And then the most recent trip was just a couple weeks ago.
Okay, gotcha. So the first one would have been right in the midst of the kind of fall 2022 offensive in Kharkiv and Kherson?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, the day Kherson was liberated was actually when we were headed out east.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, you've been in and around for a couple iterations of how this war has changed, and that's what I think would be most interesting to dive into is what was so different this time around. And you the whole long travel to get to Ukraine, it takes a long time, it's no joke. Then to Kyiv, and then you guys pretty quickly went out to the front, right?
Yep. So this last trip, we tried to time it so we could be in Kherson during the alleged ceasefire that was going on, so May 9th. And so I got into Ukraine on like the 7th. We traveled down to Kherson on the 8th, and then the 9th we woke up to a nice artillery barrage in Kherson. So
I was going to say, I don't remember much of a ceasefire. That was like would have been the May 9th May Day parade?
Yeah, their victory parade. And so I woke up like 5:30 in the morning that night. We were staying with a soldier who lives in town, and it was just artillery the entire morning. And then it got a little quieter towards noon. And around noon, then we decided to go onto the island, Osterov, which was actually just cut off. The Russians blew that bridge up, so I don't know if you can get down there anymore. But we drove down there, and then once we started seeing drone activity, we're like, all right, we're going to turn around and head back into the city, because it was just to see the area, I guess, was that purpose of going to the island. Because I was there with Chris Naganuma from Project Leaflet, and he'd never been to that part of the country before. And so we took him down there to see it. And then, because like the frontline trenches along the river they were just like 300 meters down the road from where we were.
And you were the one that first kind of tipped me off to what was going on in Kherson and how unique of a battlefield that is, just because you're talking about how it's there's a front and there's drones and artillery, but like if I remember correctly, one of your previous trips, you felt pretty safe in Kherson.
Yes, Kherson it's an interesting place because there's still like thousands of civilians living there. Like it's a functioning, operating city. There's still like public transport, buses, restaurants are open, hookah bars are open. It's just the closer you get to the river, the more deserted the city gets. And so it's like the last 4, 5, 6 blocks towards the river, it's a ghost town. Like you don't even see stray dogs walking around down there. But yeah, it's very unique. I was advised against wearing like body armor out in public down there. Because there's Russian drones all over the place, and they're looking for that, And even then, even if you're not wearing body armor, there's still a chance you'll get hit. I remember going out to supper down there with a Ukrainian soldier, and after he got there, he told us that the Russians had just dropped a grenade on a bunch of old ladies at a bus stop just down the road from where we were at. So it's a very dangerous environment, but it feels a lot safer because there's a lot of like hard cover around there. The Russians don't shoot as much artillery into the city as they do in other parts of the front line, like Pokrovsk or like Bakhmut, during their heights. But they still receive like 300 to 400 artillery shells a day. And the people there are very desensitized to it. This last trip, the first place we stopped was like a little gas station in the city. And we were there just to get like some food because it was past curfew, so most places are closed. And just right down the road, you just hear artillery shell just hits maybe like 2 blocks from us. Kids are still playing in the road. Parents are still standing out there with their food, with their drinks, talking. People just completely unfazed that an artillery shell just landed like 400 meters from them. So yeah, it's definitely the most unique frontline area I've ever been in, because you can be sitting outside in a hookah bar, like eating borscht, and then just 700-800 meters from you, there's guys in trenches in frontline positions observing the river, flying drones. It's crazy. It's crazy.
And for folks listening, one of the reasons it's unique there versus other areas of the front, because there are other cities that are about the same distance from the front lines, but in Kherson, there's the river. And there's really been no clear attempt by the Russians to cross in force since they moved back in 2022. So unlike other areas like Sumy in the northeast, where there's a real possibility at some point the Russians could break through the lines and all of a sudden are approaching the city, that's not really a top concern in Kherson, which is probably why there's so many civilians remaining, I would imagine.
Yeah. And most of the civilians that I've talked to have said like they're not leaving. Like whether the Russians do come back across the river and occupy the city, they made it through one occupation, they'll make it through another, is basically the mindset that they've got. But they're still fighting all up and down the river, specifically in like the island marshes in between the two forces. So I've got some good friends in like the Marines and the Ukrainian National Guard who are always doing cross-river operations. And for me personally, that's some of the worst, scariest combat that you could envision in modern warfare. Because once you're across the river, you're by yourself. The only support you've got from the other side is drones. And these guys will regularly spend 7 to 30 days on these islands. You can't dig in because it's all marsh. Like your holes fill up with water, and so it's just terrible fighting conditions. I've got a good friend, Baker, who I communicate with quite frequently. He's always telling me these crazy stories about them crossing the river, fighting the Russians, and in many cases, like point blank firefights, because a lot of the terrain around there, it's just tall reeds, so you can't see the enemy until you're right up on them. Yeah, it reminds me a lot of like the Pacific jungle fighting from the Second World War, except now you add drones and automatic rifles into the mix.
It sounds like with those islands, because there's not a ton of value in those. What's the purpose of going? Is it just simply there are Russians there, so we're going to kill the Russians, and vice versa?
Yeah. A big piece of what it was explained to me is to prevent the Russians from bringing their heavy mortars onto the islands, so they can mortar the city indefinitely. The city already receives glide bombs, artillery daily, and drones. And so they're just trying to lighten the load on the civilian population by denying heavy mortars hitting as well. And they just don't want the Russians to establish another fortified area closer to Ukrainian lines.
Makes sense. So after your time in Kherson, did you shift? Where'd you go from there? Move east, I imagine?
Yeah, right after Kherson, this last trip, we went straight out east to the Pokrovsk area with the 25th Airborne Brigade.
Okay. I don't remember exactly everywhere you went in previous trips. I remember in 2022, you talked about visiting a lot of previous battlefields, areas that were held by the Russians and they were pushed out, especially north of Kyiv. Were you ever in an area that was as hotly contested as Pokrovsk was this time around?
No, Pokrovsk was hands down the most kinetic environment I've ever been in. Kherson was like a good getting your dipping your toes in sort of situation of being around like a high volume of artillery and drones. But in Pokrovsk, it was just another story. The whole city reminds me of like a Silent Hill game or a movie. Like you can't move around in the daytime because there's so many drones in the air. Like when you infill and exfill, it's always at night. And then it's just, I don't remember I think the city pre-war had a population of like 90,000 or something like that. And then when I was there were roughly 3,000 people left. And it's just, the situation there it's very difficult, specifically along the flanks. And so the area where the drone team that I was embedded with was operating, their little area of responsibility was directly south of the city. And so there's like a little lake, like a little pond there and some tree strips. And that was like their specific AO that they were flying drones into. And they flew lots of missions, like tons of missions a day.
Were they just watching that area, or is that like how would you describe that? That was their field of fire?
Yeah, so it's kind of like their field of fire. So how it works is there's like an overall. So this is pretty interesting. I got to see like the different levels of communication through drone warfare. So the first day I was in the Pokrovsk area, I wasn't in the city yet, but I went with one of like the high level observation drones. It was like one of the VTOL ones that like has got a vertical takeoff and it flies super high in the air. I don't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but they take shifts flying over specific parts of the battlefield and identifying targets. And so that's all they do is they fly. They're like, hey, there's a guy walking across a field here. There's a truck over here. We've identified a new fighting position over here. And then local commanders will pick out targets that they want hit. And then they'll give those orders out to the local drone teams. And so the local drone team, they don't have a whole lot of autonomy about what they're going to attack. And so it's okay. We want a shrapnel drone to attack this house. We want you to fly in through the window and have shrapnel explode everywhere. Or we want a thermobaric drone to strike this house, or an anti-vehicle drone to hit this truck, something like that. And they'll usually spin up one or two different teams. And so if one isn't successful, the second or third, sometimes even the fourth or fifth drone, will get them.
Okay. So would you say like a high priority target might get 3-4 teams, whereas like a lone infantryman out in the open, maybe just one or two teams dedicated to that?
Yeah. So the way it was described, so the day I got there, the day previous was a motorcycle assault. And so all the teams were spun up and they were just hitting these bikes. If something like a tank comes onto the battlefield, it's going to get hit and it's going to get hit several times. It's like the highest priority target. Whereas like one guy walking through a field, that it'll just probably be one team hitting them and they'll just hit him over and over. And so they can usually spin up a drone like every 10 minutes. And so they'll fly a drone out, hit someone, or they'll miss him or wound him or something like that. And then they'll spin up the next drone. So they'll get it prepared to launch, take off. It's usually like 6-7 minutes flight time. So if you're a Russian soldier and you see an FPV drone, you can expect to see another one within about 10 minutes. And that's just if one team is targeting you.
You said there were a lot of strikes taking, it was kind of near continuous. Can you give a rough estimate? Like how often were these missions taking place? How many in a day?
Between all the teams or just the team I was with?
Just the team you were with, yeah.
So it's kind of dictated on the Russian schedule, basically. And so they're very active right before sunrise and then for about 2 hours after sunrise. And then they're very active again between like an hour before sunset and like an hour after sunset. And so that's like the most popular times you're going to see lots of drones in the air. But then there's
that
always...
That is genuinely like hunting.
Yeah.
Like deer hunting is what it sounds like. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was the attitude for a lot of the guys, like it's drone warfare, so it's very detached. you know. So like I remember the operator that I was with did a mission, struck, hit the target, and then immediately started eating like a bowl of cornflakes afterwards. Like put the controller down and started eating cornflakes, you know. So it's like a very detached sort of warfare. But I would guess probably as for like total missions, maybe 20 in a day.
One team, 20 missions a day.
One team, 20 missions, and then there were drone teams all over the place. There was a team probably like 4 or 5 houses down from us that was also flying tons of missions, and they actually got spotted, I believe, and they got hit by a Russian drone team 4 times in an hour. And so after that happened, like we had stopped flying because we didn't want our position to get burned either, and so we stopped flying for like an hour or two until we were pretty sure that the Russians had like moved on from observing that specific area. There's one time I actually got quite scared. So were getting a drone prepared to fly, and so it was outside. There's the engineer out there, like arming the drone, and then right as that happens, we hear a Russian FPV come right over the building, and then he starts like doing this circling type of thing, and so everyone runs inside quick, but the drone is still out there on its little pallet, you know, and so the concern is that if he sees the drone on the pallet, they're going to know this is a drone position. And so we're either going to get hit by lots of FPVs or we're going to get a glide bomb directly on our position. I wasn't too concerned about FPVs because the building we were in was pretty large and there were lots of different doorways. And so if we wanted to shield ourselves, we just close the door. You know, there would be like several layers of doors they would have to get through before they got to us. It's a pretty sturdy building, but it still would not stop like a cab or a Fab 500.
Yeah, that would have been
which
rough.
they were dropping tons of. That's like a new fear unlocked for me is the sound of airplanes because that's what they sound like when they come in.
Bombs sound like airplanes?
Yeah, it sounds like almost kind of like a Stuka dive bomber. You can hear them coming in for probably 4 or 5 seconds before they hit. And we were pretty lucky once because the loudest one we heard actually probably ended up being a dud because we heard the and then nothing. So one was close enough. It blew the doors open on our building. And they typically drop them in threes. So yeah, like the glide bombs are a very scary thing and the Russians have plenty of them. I actually took a log when I was there, the 2 days that I was there of everything that happened during those 2 days. And so every time there was like a grad strike or a glide bomb that exploded, I had logged it. And I'll send that to you when we're done here. The only thing I didn't take note of was the amount of artillery because it was just continuous. Like it was too much to count. But as far as like drone strikes that we heard incoming, it was tons of them, and lots of artillery, lots of grad. Anything you can picture that the Russians have in their arsenal, the city of Pokrovsk was receiving it.
Can you talk a little bit about the Infill Xfill process? Because you mentioned all of a sudden you're there and you're flying these missions, but when we spoke previously, you're talking about some of getting there, and it's no joke. It's not You're not just driving and jumping out and you're at the position.
Yeah, so Infill Xfill is, in my opinion, probably the most dangerous and probably the scariest part of getting to these frontline positions. So Infill, so the day prior, we were out with an artillery unit, and the plan was to spend 24 hours with them, you know, live with them, eat with them, kind of get the whole experience. We get out there, we drive through one of these FPV net tunnels, my first time being in one. And this is a little further back from the line, so this tunnel was like in immaculate condition. It looked like it was just built. It was great, you know, and you have got a lot of peace of mind when you're driving through those. It's for at least this 700-meter stretch, you know, it's like I'm probably going to be good. So you feel a lot safer driving through those. And we got to the position, they fired one round, and then we had to get back in the car and go because of counter battery. And so we talked to the Brigade 2IC, and I was like, this is kind of not what we wanted. I want to be like with the troops, you know, like put me in danger. And so that night, you know, we're infilling into the city of Pokrovsk itself. And so this infill was probably the scariest one I've had. So we park at a gas station, maybe like 15 kilometers outside the city, and we're sitting there waiting. And from what I understand is we were waiting for like the local drone teams to be like, all right, we're not intercepting any drone feeds. Everything looks quiet now. And then they'll turn on the brigade reb. And so it's like a brigade wide, like drone jammer, basically type of thing. And, they're moderately effective. Effective enough at the front, like nothing's ever 100%, but it was, So it's pitch black outside. We're sitting at this gas station and we get the call to go in. And then we drive for like 2 or 3 minutes and I start seeing burnt out vehicles on the road and pushed off into ditches and stuff like that. And so when you start seeing that, you're really getting into it. Saw a couple like disabled, like armored track vehicles, like a M113. I think I told you about one of those that was burnt out. And then we entered the FPV tunnel to the northwest of Pokrovsk. And this one had been through the ringer. You can tell like the Russians had targeted it a lot. It was full of holes. A bunch of the poles were like bent and or just not in the ground anymore. It felt more like a trap than a form of protection. Because there are plenty of holes big enough for a drone to slide in there and get you. And so, and this is with your headlights on, by the way, because the team I was with, they do not have night vision, or at least not enough for the drivers.
Hey, I'm going to interject here real quick. So they don't have night vision yet, but that's the goal of this current fundraiser. I mean, the new truck and night vision device that we're working towards, the link in the description below, your donations are going to these guys right here that Nick is talking about in this story. So just keep that in mind as he continues. Let's get back to it.
Wow. Yeah. So I'm like filming all of this, and I can send you this footage of the infill. And it's a lot like Silent Hill because you're driving around a city, but there's no lights on. And there's holes all over the road. There's buildings that are like half burnt down or half destroyed. And it's like, and it looks a lot like most like American cities, like you can picture most medium-sized towns in the United States. And that's what Pokrovsk is like. There's like ice cream stores, coffee shops, residential homes, all of it's abandoned, or there's people still there, but they're living in their basements. And we're driving around and I noticed on the way in all these shell holes that had filled up with water. And that'll come into the story later on. We're like driving through these holes, drive halfway through the city. And then I see this little red light on the road in front of us. And we pull up and it's a guy with a red light on his helmet. And he waves us in. We get out of the car as fast as we can. The driver, it felt like stopped for like 2 seconds. So it's like we open the door, get out, and he's already gone by the time the door is closing. We run into this building. There's the drone operators inside of there. They introduce themselves to me, and I introduce myself to them. I let them know I'm a journalist. I'm trying not to be in their way. Let me know what you need. Let me know what I can do to be as minimal of a presence in your job as possible. And so, yeah, the ride in was good. Like, it was still scary because of the drone threat and all that stuff. But that first evening was quiet. And so, I wanted to get working right away to start filming. And so I asked, like, when are you guys flying missions? And this was probably 2:30 in the morning. And he's like, Russians are pretty active, usually around 5, and so we'll wake you up. And so I'm in the basement sleeping on this like the little cot, and they've got like all their drone monitors up and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I went to bed. So that was like the whole infill on the first day.
And I do want to, for anybody that, of course, all of Nick's channels will be linked in the description below, Battles and Beers. He does an incredible job of telling other people's stories. So I am kind of putting Nick on the spot today to tell his story. I can assure you, anybody who hasn't come across his work before, he's not going to Ukraine to tell some crazy story about traveling the dangerous roads to Pokrovsk. He's certainly going to have a lot of really, really interesting, in-depth details about the guys that he's mentioning right here. So, Nick, no pressure, but a lot of pressure. Get those videos out. We're starting to see it, man. All right, so you're there. How long did you stay in position about the same amount of time as drone teams, or what did that look like?
So the drone rotations differ depending on the unit and the part of the front line that you're at. So some drone teams, they'll be on position for 10 days. Other teams will, like the team I was with, they were doing 3 days on, 3 days off. And so the day I got there was their third day. And so this was going to be like their final day on position. And that following night, we were going to exfil with them. And so that day was a lot of flying drones, figuring out where to use the restroom, and just honestly just hanging out. Like it's a lot of just sitting, waiting for the higher command to issue an order for a drone strike. And sometimes you'll get them back to back, like back to back to back to back. And then other times there'll be like 4 hours where you're just sitting there. Like they found 2 chairs and a chessboard in one of the houses, and they just sat next to each other and played a game of chess on the floor, waiting for a drone mission, cooking food, cleaning rifles, stuff like that. It's very chill, and especially the position we were at. They were describing the position like the hotel, the Hilton, because it was a huge building. There's lots of places to explore, stuff like that. Whereas other drone positions, there's like 5 guys living in a closet basically, and they go up the cellar steps to launch the drone in the backyard and fly it and then go back down. But the place we were at was very spacious. People, sleeping on the floor, like playing Nintendo Switch, stuff like that. And then there's Starlink as well, so you could communicate inside and out. So, I was watching all the TikToks my now wife sends me.
Yeah, there we go.
Like that. Yeah. So, but yeah, so it was very chill, but lots of artillery all day long, drone strikes, stuff like that. I'll send you some footage of some drones that flew right over our building, stuff like that. So it was very interesting the first day.
But you were out of there pretty quick then. So you were in a day's worth of activity. I kind of wonder back of mind if when the journalist says, I want to be in it, if they think put him in the good position or put him in the shit position. I can see it going either way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sounds like you got a good setup for what it's worth. As good as it can be in an area like that. But so a day and a half, and you've got Xfill coming. Did you know what you were getting into with that? Similar process?
So Xfill, the first day was a problem. So I was only supposed to spend 24 hours with them, and we ended up spending about 50 at that position. Like during the day, we had heard a bunch of like the Russian or during the early evening hours, so like right after it gotten dark, we started hearing like the heavy bomber drones, like those ones with like 6 propellers that are like enormous. We started hearing those coming from the Russian direction, flying over our building, and then hearing no boom, and then the drone would go back towards the Russians, and we're like, what are they doing? So Xfill comes, or it's time for Xfill. They get like a third the way through the city, and they're like, we've got to turn around. There's too many landmines on the road. Like we're just going to hit a mine and blow up. And so they turn around and go back to base, and so we're stuck there another day. The only issue with that is so I was told to bring nothing out there other than the camera equipment and like a blanket to sleep. So
it's going to be a quick trip, man. Yeah.
Yeah, so I brought like one nonstop, which is like the equivalent of like a Ukrainian Red Bull, and like 2 chocolate bars. And so the drone position, like the guys on it, thought they were going to get Xfilled that night too. And so they drank all their water, eaten all their food. And so the next day was drone operations and foraging, because now we didn't know how long we were going to be out there. So like we were straining rainwater through a bucket in my underwear, my Under Armour underwear, and then boiling it for drinking water. So yeah, it was pretty interesting. The second day, because we didn't know how long we were going to be out there, and the second day actually was not very eventful from the Russian side. It was only when it started getting dark that like most of their drones started getting spun up. The artillery picked up, the grad picked up, all that stuff. And so I started getting nervous around that point, because it was like we'd already had a couple close calls in this building. And so now it's like, all right, well, if I'm if I'm a cat and I'm using all my lives at the moment, like how many do I have left, sort of thing. And so there was one moment that got really real. So a couple cabs had just come in pretty close to us, and so we were all sitting in a basement in the building, and I was leaning up against a brick wall, and I felt an explosion through the wall, like the shock of it, and it didn't sound like an FPV or an artillery, anything like that. It was like a new sound to me, and the drone commander, he was like, landmine. So we went up the stairs, and I was like peeking out the window, and you could see like the orange glow of a fire just like a street over from us. And still don't know who it was. It could have been a military vehicle or a civilian or something. But we heard the guy that had driven over a mine, and we don't know if it was the driver or somebody else, but he was screaming, you know? And so it's myself, one of the Ukrainians, and Chris are all just kind of gathered around this window, listening to this guy scream until the sound of the dogs barking drowned it out. And I remember just looking at Chris, and he was looking at me, and it was like, dude, that could be us in like 2 hours, sort of thing. So yeah, there were a lot. So, and then right after that happened, there were more heavy bomber drones flying over the building. No explosion, flying back towards the Russian side. And so I'll rewind a little bit. So during the day,
a random aside here real quick, because what you just described, I think is pretty commonplace for a lot of people in Ukraine that are fighting this war for 3 years now. And the reason I think it's interesting to talk to people like you that do not spend all of your time there, and you go in there and you experience this for a short period of time and come out, is that type of event registers as something to mention and bring up. But somebody who's been in position for 3 years, they might not even think. Like, that's just too commonplace to even mention. So, yeah, that should stand out. That's crazy for anybody to have to experience, and no doubt there's thousands of people who have been through that day after day after day. It's wild.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like a good example of that is the glide bombs that would come in close. There was one of the Ukrainians who didn't want to sleep in the cellar because the sleeping accommodations down there were uncomfortable. So he had dragged a mattress from one of the closer houses and like was sleeping on the first floor, and like cabs would come in, like all these sorts of munitions would come in, and he would just lay there and sleep through it all, you know, while Chris and I are like bolting into the basement every time we hear, you know, and he's just unfazed by it, you know.
If it happens, it happens.
So, yeah. But, yeah, to rewind a little bit, during the day, we had used one of the Mavic recon drones to recon the route we were taking out of the city to look for these landmines. So we were like looking around, and there were a whole ton of new burnt out vehicles in the city that were not there the day prior. And so the vehicles were hitting these mines. They were getting struck by drones and stuff like that. So towards the end of the second day, I was getting a little nervous, you know. The environment was starting to take its toll on my how do I describe it? I was just starting to get a little more nervous towards the end of the second day.
That's fair.
So then, like, it's nighttime now, and there's a camera feed that the Ukrainians have that's just intercepting Russian drone feeds. And so we're watching on the camera drone after drone chase Ukrainian vehicles out of Pokrovsk.
Out of the one road.
On the road out.
One way out, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, I'm going to be on this road in a couple hours. Hopefully, if we make it through the mines, we're going to be on this road. And so that was another, like, knock on the door of my mental sanity. You know, it's like, oh, man. Again, it was such a weird experience, too, because we're sitting there watching, like, cheering these vehicles on, you know, go faster, faster, you know, and it's like, oh, my gosh, there's a turn coming up. Like, go, dude. Come on. Like, you can make it. Just go faster. Because a lot of them had no idea there was a drone chasing them because it's nighttime, you know. So, but we were pretty blessed at this time because the cloud cover dissipated. It was like almost a full moon, so you could see pretty well in the dark. Like I could look out the window and like make out features on the ground. I could see probably like a block. So Xfill comes, and I remember I got told to look above us to make sure there wasn't a vampire drone standing there while they were unloading, or a vampire drone hovering above us, to make sure that it wasn't going to drop something on the truck as the incoming FPV team was offloading the drones and explosives that they were going to be using, and as our team was loading their equipment to Xfill. So I'm like standing there, like looking above me, like,
hope you know what you're looking for. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, all right, well, it's pretty well, it was pretty clear night, so if there was something up there, I probably would have seen it.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. So we get in the pickup. I'm in the seat behind the driver, and then there's a dude off to my right, and then there's a guy in the back of the truck with Chris.
So you're just in like pickup trucks.
It's just a pickup truck, a soft skin pickup truck, which again speaks like the courage of these guys going back and forth on the front line in soft skin pickup trucks, or even civilian cars sometimes, bicycles even. And so I'm filming the extract. The driver, he's looking on the ground for landmines. The assistant driver, he's looking for drones. And the guys in the back, they're looking for drones. And so they hand Chris a rifle. And they're like, if you're going to be in the back of the truck, you're at least going to be useful. And so he's sitting back there with a rifle with one of the Ukrainians. And we're like weaving through these back streets trying to get out. And like every time there was like a big deep pothole in the road filled with water, it felt like, all right, this is the last thought I'm ever gonna have. And then we drive through it, and we wouldn't blow up, and I'd be like, all right, cool, okay, another puddle coming up. This is the last thought I'm ever gonna have. And it was just that over and over. And so then we reached the railroad where we were supposed to make one of our turns to continue on the path. But there was some blockage there, and we had to take a new path out, one that we had not reconned. And so again, that's just rolling the dice, you know. So we're taking a new path out. We end up making it back to the FPV tunnel, drive through it, and then after a couple, and there's new blown up vehicles all along this path too. So it's like stuff had been hit just in the 2 days we had been there. So we're driving through this tunnel. We reach the end of it. We drive another couple minutes, and then the vehicle starts slowing down. And they're like, all right, we should be in the clear, you know. So like, remember that gas station I told you that we were waiting for the safe spot?
Yeah.
We were approaching that. So it was like just right up ahead.
Which is still, at that point, you're still in range of a lot of Russian munitions. You're not in the clear by any stretch.
Yeah. Okay. But they felt it was far enough where we could slow down from 150 kilometers an hour. So off to my left, there was a bunch of tracer fire going across the moon. I remember looking at, and I was like, what's that? And they're like, they're probably shooting at like a Shahid or something. And so I thought, oh, that's kind of pretty. So I'd like at that point put my camera away, and I pulled out my phone to start recording the tracers flying across the moon. And as soon as I press play, Chris and the Ukrainian in the back just start opening up with their rifles. And so the driver immediately looks at the A driver, and then the next thing I know, it's like a jolt in the car because we had just sped up. Turns out we had gotten chased by a drone that was likely waiting at the end of the FPV tunnel, and it was probably fiber optic because we were allegedly beyond the normal range of like a radio controlled FPV. And so, yeah, we had passed the gas station that we were waiting at, the safe spot, and we were almost to Dobropilia. And then we ended up making it into Dobropilia, pulled off into this like alleyway. I got out of the truck, run back to check on Chris and the Ukrainian, and Chris is just looking at me with the rifle in his hands, like wide-eyed, and he's like, dude, there was a drone, it was diving on us. And the Ukrainian, it was the same way. I was like, dude, you guys just saved our lives. Like, whether or not you hit the drone, you like alerted us in time to speed up the car. And yeah, and then we went back to that Ukrainian's apartment, and we all three of us shared the one beer he had in his fridge.
Celebration.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, and then the next morning we went and got breakfast at a breakfast place, which is no longer there. I think the Russians blew it up actually recently. I went and got breakfast like the Ukrainian version of like a full English breakfast, and it was like the best food I'd ever had. I was like, oh, thank God, we made it out of there.
I mean, that's a wild, 48, 72 hours?
It was 48 hours just in Pokrovsk, and then the surrounding area, we were with another drone team in artillery, and then that was the day Chris actually had to leave, and so I ended up going to another artillery position and then the brigade stabilization point as well. And so I did 2 more like outings without Chris after that.
What was the next place you went after Pokrovsk?
So the next place was, I think it's pronounced Minrad. It's the town directly east of Pokrovsk. It's the one the Russians are like currently moving through.
Yeah, that's not far. I thought you were going to talk about like a new sector of the front. Like that place is
still,
right.
And we actually ended up being closer to the front line there than we were in Pokrovsk. So I was with an artillery unit there, and that was just a whole different vibe. The guys there were mostly like middle-aged dads, you know. And again, we drive out, but I'll say the drive out there was a lot sketchier because we had to cross just a lot more open fields, like just driving a pickup through like a field, whereas like in Pokrovsk you're on a road and you can drive a lot faster. So getting to this artillery position was a little more sketchy in terms of like you were just a lot more exposed a lot more often. And we ended up making it to that position. When I got there, all the soldiers were still sleeping. And so our translator goes to like wake someone up. And we're sitting there and we park the car, the truck in some trees, maybe like 100 meters from us. And I'm standing there waiting and we start hearing a drone buzzing around. I'm like looking at my translator and he's looking at me. And we're like standing under this like awning of trees. And so like we're moderately concealed. And then the drone hits something and blows up. And I remember just looking at Misha and being like, oh man, I hope that wasn't our car. Because that was like the explosion came from like that area. Yeah. So luckily they didn't hit the car. But there were still like tons of drones flying around that area, like all day long. And they fired a lot of artillery rounds too. The guys I was with I was talking with, most of them were former infantrymen, like they're former riflemen. And so they're like, there's pros and cons to being infantry or being artillery. He's like, infantry, you're going to see a lot more FPV drones and stuff like that. You're going to have higher casualties, but it's a lot more of those instances of like wrong place, wrong time sort of thing, where it's like if you're artillery and you get spotted, you're probably going to die because you're going to get glide bombs on their position. Like you're a much higher target than some random infantryman in a trench sort of thing. So he's like, it's kind of a trade-off. He's like, you're a little safer as an artilleryman until you get spotted sort of thing. But their guns were fantastically concealed. So like I got to the artillery position and I was like, where's the gun? Were
they right there. Towed or self-propelled howitzers?
Self-propelled. So the gun I was with was actually captured from the Russians.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, so every time they'd fire it, they'd just be like, "Oh, we're just giving them back, like they're."
That's fine. Yeah.
We're just sharing, But yeah, they fired lots of rounds, and there was a surprisingly high amount of artillery guns in that area too, and so they would all fire like 2 or 3 rounds like within a couple minutes of each other, and so there were guns everywhere, all over, firing most of the day. They had a really nice bunker that they were sleeping in and eating. Is very homey. When I showed up, went down into the bunker with the guy. Most of the soldiers were sleeping, but their commander was like sitting there, like peeling potatoes and like cutting up peppers and making like a meal, like a nice hot cooked meal. And that's what we had for breakfast with them. Was this like actually amazingly wonderful home cooked meal, like 4 kilometers from the Russians. It was crazy.
You mentioned the first artillery position you went to. They fired 1 round and then everybody scattered because of counter battery. It sounds like what you're describing now is just an entirely different scenario, but still very close to the front.
These guys didn't care. like the first position I was at, I think they were more concerned for like press safety, because of the threat of Russian counter battery. But it was still like last trip I was near Pokrovsk or Toretsk with Azov artillery, and I was asking them about Russian counter battery, and they're like, "What counter battery?" Like most of the Russian artillery units that we've like had artillery duels with don't have that sort of technical know-how.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so it depends on where you are in the front and like what artillery unit is in front of you. And so it looked like the one in the Pokrovsk area just didn't have the tech or the technical know-how to do accurate counter battery. They did fire rounds back at us, but they were like 300-400 meters off.
That's not that far.
Yeah, not that far.
Meter artillery round impacting is not that far away.
Yeah, there's actually one kind of funny video that I ended up getting on my GoPro. Is one of the counter battery rounds came in and it hit like semi close, and I was like, and just like kept walking towards the outhouse. And I had another experience in there too. So I was in the outhouse that they were using, and I had like just finished up, and I hear this buzzing above me, and I thought, oh man, I was like looking, I was like looking in the hole in there, like judging if I could fit in there, if it would even be worth it. I was like, this is a wooden outhouse. Is it going to protect me if I get into this hole, or am I just going to die covered in feces, sort of thing? And I was like, I made the decision. I was like, I'll just let it hit me. Like, I'm not.
Positive thoughts, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, I'm not going to get in there.
All right, so from the artillery unit, you said you went to one more location then after that?
Yeah, then I went to the casualty stabilization point.
For the same general area, same units
the same
there?
area. So most of the guys getting wounded in the Pokrovsk area were taken to this stabilization point. And they say, go ahead.
Could you describe the stabilization point concept real quick? It's a step above a casualty collection point, but not yet to a hospital. How would you frame it?
It's like the first step of like professional hospital-like care that you get off the front line, and it's usually like 5 to 15 kilometers off of the front. And so like the guys get wounded on the front, they get patched up a little bit by the medics there, and then the first place they're taken is the stabilization point. And so
there's usually like doctors or surgeons level at the stabilization point. Is that accurate?
Yeah, there's doctors and some surgeons and stuff there. Like I've seen like amputations taking place there, like bullet removal, stuff like that. It's the higher levels of care, like in a proper hospital, where they're taken next.
Gotcha. Okay.
So yeah, this stabilization point was actually just like a house. It was at some point someone's house, and so you go into it, and it's like the house has been gutted, it's been sanitized. They've got like plastic sheets on the walls and on the floors and the ceiling and stuff like that. It's very sanitized. Very nice positions. Like I would feel comfortable being treated for a wound at like your average Ukrainian stab point. And they say if you can make it to a stab point, odds are definitely in your favor that you'll survive. It's just the issue is getting there, because soldiers can be wounded and wait up to 3 days to be evacuated because of drone. And so, it's not like Iraq or Afghanistan where you get wounded, you can be on a helicopter out in 20, 30 minutes. Now you're getting carried out of the front line, usually by hand. Someone is carrying you to an ATV or an ambulance type of thing, and then you're taken to a stab point. But that process can take days. Like if you are wounded and end up at a stab point within 24 hours, like you're one of the lucky ones. So yeah, and almost all the casualties come in at night because it's too dangerous to move along in the daytime. So we had a bunch of guys come in around midnight, and all of them shrapnel wounds. I don't think I went to the Azov stabilization point last October, and 2 guys came in with gunshot wounds there. But here at this stab point in Pokrovsk, everyone came in with shrapnel and burn wounds from drones and artillery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it, right? Like there's definitely areas where Russian soldiers are within small arms fire, but it's the minority. It seems
Yeah.
like at this point. Okay.
So we did see gunfights happen with the FPV team through their drones. So like we were also like helping to walk on soldiers into buildings Russians were hiding in, and so like we did observe gunfights. Like we saw a couple Russians get killed after Ukrainians like threw grenades down into a basement. So like gunfights are still happening, but most of it is guys sitting hundreds of meters away from each other in trenches, just eating drones. And so to rewind a little bit, this will be a little important later. So that night, I could either go to the stabilization point or I could go with an all-female vampire drone unit. And so one of the nighttime drone, like heavy bombers. And so I was going to go with the female bomber unit, but their Infill Xfill vehicle was having engine problems. And so they're like, we're getting the engine fixed at the moment. It's kind of a 50-50 on whether or not you're going to be able to go out with them tonight. Or you could go to the stabilization point 100%. Like you can just drive out there. And so I thought, okay, this is my last night. I'm going to do the for sure thing and go out to the stabilization point. So I dropped out of the filming the bomber drones. And so we're at the stabilization point, and this is typically, these memories are ones I do kind of struggle with because there's something like, for me, psychologically, there's something really difficult about seeing like grown men like in agony. You know, like that was tough for me to see. And I remember these guys were just in so much pain, you know, because they're just, there's one guy I took a video of and photos of, like his whole body had like burns on it, shrapnel wounds. It was just, these poor guys, man. Like it was tough to see, and it's tough to verbalize in such a way that honors the situation that they were in accurately.
I understand. Yeah.
But yeah, I will say like the professionalism of the medics and stuff there, like no matter how bad a guy is injured or whatever the situation is, like they go above and beyond their ability of care to take care of these people. And that was very inspiring. And a lot of these people were like normal doctors, like before the war. One of the guys there, he was like a children's like nutritionalist, you know, stuff like that. And now he's pulling bullets and shrapnel out of guys' arms and chests and stuff. So nothing but respect for those medics and those doctors and those surgeons. I was truly amazed that like you could get this level of care that close to the front line. It was very impressive. So I ended up going to bed at around like 4 a.m. They had like little cots and stuff in there for all the doctors and stuff, like little coffee stand, and they made it as homey as they could. And so I go to bed, I'm asleep for like 30 minutes, and then I wake up to like blood curdling screaming outside. So I walk outside and I see the ambulance is there, and then I walk into like the little treatment area and I see this guy on the ground in a uniform. He's still got like the tape on his arm, like the blue tape and stuff. And it's like normal uniform jacket, and then once you get to his hips, it's just red. And he's on the ground just screaming, and like his pants are like all ripped up from the shrapnel and stuff like that. And he's just riddled with shrapnel, like waist down. And then there's another guy with him sitting on a bench. Also just lots of shrapnel wounds all over him, but he's more detached from it. Like that 1,000-yard stare type of thing. He was a lot more detached. And so they like cut the pants off that guy on the ground and they put him on the table and they're treating him, and he's in immense amounts of pain. And then he begins to calm down once they start getting some painkillers in him. And the other guy, the more present one, he's like trying to show everyone pictures on his phone of the car that they were just in. He's like, look at this. And it's like, dude, you're kind of messed up right now. Like Like he just
We'll
wasn't
look at it
there.
later. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, we'll look at it later, man. You get treated. And he's like, oh, you got to look at this. He was just not there. But so they get treated. I film them getting loaded into the ambulance and take off towards the hospital. I think they went to the one in Dnipro, but didn't think anything of it too crazy. Just more casualties. And so I get in the pickup to leave, and the brigade 2IC texts me, and he's like, "It's probably a good thing you didn't go out with those vampire drones last night because they got hit. I believe you saw." He's like, "You probably saw the driver and the A driver at the stab point just now." And I was like,
Dang.
"Wow!" Like, yeah, I would have been in that vehicle with them. Didn't connect the dots. And he's like, "Yeah, it's probably a good thing you didn't go out with them, or else you would have been the third one on the floor." So, yeah, it was interesting.
Well,
Interesting trip.
Yeah, thank you for going, man, and thank you for doing that. It's hard to get good documentation of a lot of this, and I feel like there's times in certain conflicts where there's an overwhelming amount of information, and then as it drags on like this, there's less and less. Like, there's just not that many accounts coming out of Pokrovsk right now. There's just not. There's just not a lot of attention there, especially from American media. So thank you for going and documenting that, man. What can we expect? Are we getting? Is it books? Is it videos? What are you doing with all of the information you gathered there?
So there's some stuff possibly in the works with Vet TV at the moment.
Awesome.
For like a mini documentary.
Good.
But I will still keep the rights to all my footage and the stories and stuff like that. And so most of it will be going up on YouTube. And the soldiers' experiences will be in future books and stuff like that. I've put kind of a pause on writing books lately just because it's the pace of stories keeps coming. Like the war is still ongoing, so I'll formulate books and stuff after it's done. But right at the moment, it's like these guys are fighting and in some cases dying every day. And so I'm trying to get as many of those documented as possible while they're still here. Because it has happened before. I've had interviews scheduled, and the guy never makes it because he doesn't make it. So yeah, YouTube stuff currently. There's been a bit of a pause on the YouTube channel lately because of like demonetization of like the footage and stuff like that. So we're changing up how we're doing things, but soon there'll be a lot more YouTube content. You can find me on there, Instagram, Facebook, everywhere. So yeah, all of it's going up on there.
Love that. Well, keep it up, man. We'll of course link all of your stuff below, but it's really important, not just for people trying to keep track of what's going on right now, but this is the work you're doing is the kind of stuff people are going to look back on in years for those first person accounts of these stories that I know you're a history guy. So you and I, at times you want more. There's never a scenario where you're like, I wish we had fewer first person accounts from the trenches of the Western Front. Like, you always want more, and you're doing a great service, putting those out right now. So thank you very much, Nick, for what you're doing.
Yeah, of course. It's an honor and a privilege to be trusted to be out there with these guys. So,
all right, man. Well, always good chatting. Thanks for taking the time, and we'll do this again soon.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
All right, so thank you again so much to Nick for taking the time to do this and for honestly taking the risk to go over to Ukraine and self-funding it, by the way. He didn't mention that, but going over and spending his own money to get there, putting his life on the line multiple times to be able to tell these stories. I know I mentioned it during the course of the interview, but the reason he does that is not to talk about himself. We got to pull that out of him, but it's to tell the stories of the people that he's there with and interviewing and spending time around. So be sure to follow Nick's accounts. He's always putting out really, really high quality information. And I genuinely believe Nick's is going to be one of those pages, one of those accounts historians are looking at down the road when we're trying to better understand exactly what this war was like from a first person perspective. But with that, again, we've got the fundraiser in the description for those able and interested in contributing to these soldiers in the 25th. We're also using those funds to pick up some trucks for a very similar mission set for some friends of ours in the 47th. If interested, if able, please consider donating. It would mean the absolute world. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.